My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 27 years old, and I didn't realize my engagement was already over until my boyfriend laughed during couples counseling like he'd just told a harmless joke while explaining that he only stayed with me because being single at his age felt depressing. I didn't cry. I didn't interrupt him. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening to the sound of something precious quietly collapsing. We'd been together 4 years, engaged for 8 months, long enough that our life felt settled. Predictable maybe, but safe in the way people confuse with permanent. It was his idea to go to counseling. That's the part people always get wrong. I hadn't complained. I hadn't threatened to leave. I hadn't sensed disaster. He said he felt disconnected, said he wanted to fix things before the wedding. And I agreed because when someone you love says they're struggling, you show up. You don't argue. You don't defend yourself. You show up. So, I sat in a softly lit office on a Thursday evening in early March, across from Dr. Patricia Hammond, a calm woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and a notepad she barely touched. She asked the usual questions. How long have we been together? Why did we get engaged? What brought us here? He went first. He talked about routine, about losing spark, about feeling like we'd become roommates instead of partners. I nodded, took mental notes, thought, okay, we can work on this. Then Dr. Hammond asked him to be specific. What do you mean by routine? He shifted in his seat, smiled awkwardly. Well, Claire's very predictable. She wakes up early, goes to work, comes home, cooks the same rotation of meals, same shows, same clothes. Everything's very safe. My jaw tightened, but I stayed quiet. Dr. Hammond nodded. And how does that make you feel? He exhaled like he'd been waiting for permission, like I'm settling. Then he laughed. A small laugh, nervous, almost playful. Your mom loves, but she's kind of plain. I felt heat rush behind my eyes. Still, I didn't speak, and honestly, he continued, still smiling. I think the main reason I stayed is because being single at my age is depressing. The words landed heavy, final. He kept laughing like he expected agreement, like this was normal couples therapy, honesty. Dr. Hammond didn't laugh. She turned to me. Claire, how are you feeling hearing this? I looked at my boyfriend. He was still smiling. That smile, the one that said he genuinely didn't understand what he'd just destroyed. I think this session just fixed everything for me, I said. His smile dropped. What? He asked. What do you mean? I said calmly. You just told me you don't actually want to be with me. You're with me because you're afraid of being alone. That's not. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. That's not a relationship, I continued. That's a placeholder. He frowned. Claire, you're overreacting. I was just being honest. You were, I agreed. And I appreciate it because now I know exactly what I need to do. Dr. Hammond tried to intervene gently, suggested exploration, suggested reframing. I shook my head. I'm not interested in convincing someone to want me, I said. I'm not interested in being the safe option someone settles for. The room went quiet. When the session ended, I stood, thanked the therapist, and walked out. I didn't look back. The parking lot was nearly empty. The sun had already dipped below the buildings, leaving that flat, gray-blue light that makes everything feel unfinished. I walked faster than I meant to, keys clenched in my fist, my chest tight in a way that felt almost physical, like something had lodged itself between my ribs. Claire, wait. I didn't turn around. Claire, please. His footsteps hurried to catch up. I stopped beside my car, pressed the unlock button once just to hear the click. Proof that I still had control over at least one small thing. I didn't mean it like that, he said quickly. You know that, right? I looked at him then. Really looked. His face was flushed, eyes darting, already trying to patch the damage. Not because he understood it, but because he could feel the consequences coming. Then how did you mean it? I asked. He ran a hand through his hair. I was just being honest. Therapy is about honesty. You can't punish me for that. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm listening to you. That's not fair, he snapped. You're twisting my words. You said you stayed because being single at your age is depressing. I replied evenly. You laughed while you said it. Silence. I didn't think you'd take it so personally, he muttered. That sentence did it. I'm engaged to you, I said. How could I not take that personally? He reached for me again, fingers brushing my sleeve. I stepped back. Claire, come on. We've built a life together for years. You're really going to throw that away over one badly phrased comment? You didn't say it badly, I said. You said it honestly. He opened his mouth, closed it. That hesitation, just a fraction of a second, was louder than anything else. I need space, I said, getting into my car. Don't follow me. I drove away before he could say anything else. I went to Maya's place. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and didn't ask questions. Just stepped aside and pulled me into a hug so tight it knocked the breath out of me. We sat on her couch while I told her everything. The therapy session, the laughter, the words playing and settling, echoing in my head like they'd been carved there. That's not honesty, Maya said when I finished. That's contempt. He thinks I'm overreacting, I whispered. Of course he does, she said. People always minimize the damage when they're the ones holding the knife. I didn't sleep that night. My phone buzzed endlessly. Missed calls, messages. Please call me. You're being unreasonable. We need to talk this. Through. I turned it off around midnight. The next morning, I went back to the apartment while he was at work. Our apartment. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, suddenly noticing all the things I'd stopped seeing. His shoes kicked off by the door, his coffee mug in the sink, the jacket he always draped over the chair instead of hanging up. I packed quietly. Clothes, toiletries, the stupid decorative pillows he'd insisted on. Everything that was as folded neatly into boxes and suitcases. When I finished, I stood in the living room and looked at the space. It already felt different. I called him. Claire, he answered immediately. Thank God. Your things are packed, I said. You can come get them tonight, or I can drop them off at your sister's. Your choice. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. You're serious? I've never been more serious. This is insane, he said, over one comment. It wasn't one comment, I replied. It was the truth. You don't mean that, he said, voice cracking. I love you. Then why did you hesitate? I asked softly, when I asked if you thought I was boring. Silence. Please, he said finally. Can we talk in person? Against my better judgment, I agreed. He arrived an hour later, eyes red, shoulders slumped like he'd rehearsed this posture in the mirror. We sat across from each other, me on the couch, him in the chair. The boxes were stacked by the door between us, a quiet barrier. Neither of us acknowledged. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean any of it. You did, I said. You just didn't expect me to hear it. He wiped at his eyes. Everyone has doubts. That doesn't mean they don't love their partner. There's a difference, I said, between having doubts and staying with someone because you're afraid to be alone. You're stable, he insisted. That's a good thing. That's marriage material. I don't want to be someone's material, I replied. I want to be wanted. He opened his mouth to argue then. Stopped. What about the wedding? He asked weakly. The deposits. I'll eat the cost, I said. Consider it tuition. For what? For learning this before it was legally binding. He left that afternoon. 2 trips, a borrowed SUV, no goodbye. Just the sound of the door closing behind the last box. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I could finally hear myself think. The first few days after he left were unnervingly quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that rings in your ears because your brain keeps expecting familiar noises that never come. His keys hitting the bowl by the door. His voice from the bathroom. The low hum of his presence that had filled the apartment for years. Instead, there was just me. I canceled the wedding on a Tuesday morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I stared at my laptop screen. Vendor after vendor responded with the same polite condolences and the same sharp reminder. Most deposits are non-refundable. I closed the tab without checking the total. Some losses don't need itemization. I sent one message to our families and friends. Short, neutral, vague. We've decided to go our separate ways and won't be moving forward with the wedding. Thank you for respecting our privacy. No blame, no details. I assumed you would do the same. That was my mistake. Maya called me 3 days later. Have you checked his social media? No, I said. Why would I? Because he's loud, she said carefully, and not in a good way. I checked. There it was. Post after post, thinly veiled and dripping with implication, quotes about emotional maturity, stories about how some people can't handle honesty, a long caption about men who fear self-reflection, and women who carry emotional labor alone. He never used my name. He didn't have to. Comments flooded in. Sympathy, praise, validation. I closed the app and set my phone face down. I'm not responding, I told Maya. Anyone who knows me knows the truth. She hesitated. There's more. I sighed. Of course there is. His sister called me. She's trying to get your number. I froze. Which sister? Melissa, the older one. I'd always liked Melissa. She was practical, blunt, and never played the polished relationship performance game her brother did. I agreed to call her back. Claire, Melissa said the moment I answered, I'm so sorry to do this, but I need to tell you something. My stomach tightened. He's been staying with me, she continued, and he's been telling everyone you overreacted, that you threw away 4 years over nothing. I exhaled slowly. That tracks. But I was there the night you left therapy, she said. I heard him on the phone with his friend, Kayla. My grip tightened on the phone. He was laughing, Claire, she said quietly. He told her how he'd finally been honest about you being boring and how you freaked out. He said he'd give you a few days to calm down, then you'd come crawling back. The room tilted. He said that. I asked. Yes, she said. And when Kayla asked if he even wanted you back, he said verbatim, not really. But the wedding's already planned, and I'm not starting over at my age. I sat down hard on the couch. I told him that was cruel, Melissa continued. We fought about it. He accused me of betraying him, but Claire, you did the right thing. Tears burned behind my eyes, not from surprise, but from confirmation. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle. You deserve to know, she replied. You deserve someone who's excited to choose you, not someone checking boxes. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Vindication is strange like that. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief with proof. For years. Not a love story, an arrangement. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my apartment. I just come back from the gym. Sweat-damp hair, leggings, no emotional armor. He was sitting on the front steps like a photograph from a life. I'd already lived. We need to talk, he said. I stared at him. Him, who'd laughed about me being boring. Him who'd assumed I'd crawl back. What's left to say? I asked. I've been thinking, he said, standing quickly, about what I said about how I hurt you. And I was wrong. He said I was defensive, but I think we can work through this. I'm seeing Dr. Hammond individually now. She thinks you're still seeing her? I cut in. Yes, he said. She thinks we should try couples therapy again with better headspace. I laughed once. Not cruel, just incredulously. My headspace is fine, I said. My standards just changed. His face tightened. Melissa told me what you said after therapy. I continued. About waiting for me to come crawling back. About not actually wanting me. Color drained from his face. She had no right to tell you that. So you did say it. She took it out of context. What context makes that okay? I asked. He didn't answer. And in that silence, I finally saw the pattern clearly. He stood there in front of me like someone waiting for a verdict. Hands shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. The posture of a man who wanted mercy without accountability. I was hurt, he said finally. I was venting. People say things they don't mean when they're hurt. You seem to say a lot of things you don't mean, I replied. How am I supposed to know which version of you is real? The one who loves you, he said quickly. I held his gaze. The version of you that loves me wouldn't have said any of those things. Not in therapy, not to your friend. Not ever. His jaw tightened. You're being unfair. No, I said calmly. I'm being accurate. He took a step closer. I didn't move, but I didn't step back either. I was done shrinking. For years doesn't just disappear, he said. You can't erase that because of one bad moment. It wasn't one moment, I said. It was a pattern I finally stopped explaining away. He exhaled sharply. So that's... It? You're just done. Yes. The word felt solid. Final like a door, closing without slamming. You're making a mistake, he said, voice hardening. Do you know how hard it is to find someone stable at our age? Someone compatible. I don't want to be someone you settle for, I said. I want to be someone you're excited about. That's unrealistic, he snapped. Life isn't a rom-com. I'm not asking for fireworks, I replied. I'm asking for respect. He looked at me then. Really looked. And for a split second, I saw something like panic. You'll regret this, he said. You'll see. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather regret leaving than regret staying. I turned toward the building entrance. Claire, he called after me. I paused, hand on the door. I made a mistake, he said. One mistake, he added quickly. Everyone makes mistakes. I didn't turn around. It wasn't one mistake, I said. It was 4 years of you tolerating me instead of choosing me. I went inside and closed the door. This time, I didn't listen for his footsteps leaving. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I wasn't sad, but because I wasn't confused anymore. The smear campaign faded slowly. His posts became less pointed, then sporadic, then non-existent. Melissa told me he'd started dating again. Someone spontaneous, someone exciting. I wish him well. Honestly, excitement doesn't fix emptiness, it just distracts from it. I started doing small things differently. Said yes to invitations I'd previously declined because he didn't feel like going. Took a weekend trip with Maya. Signed up for a hiking group on a whim. Picked up my guitar again, the one I'd stopped playing because he'd once joked that it was a phase. Turns out it wasn't. Dr. Hammond emailed me around that time. She asked if I consider a few individual sessions. I agreed. In our first meeting, she said something that settled deep in my chest. What happened in that session was painful, she said, but also gave you information you needed. He told you who he was. You believed him. I keep wondering if I overreacted. I admitted. You didn't, she said. You chose self-respect. 2 months later, my life felt lighter. Not perfect, but honest. I went on a few dates. Nothing serious. No pressure. There was one man, Evan, who asked me questions and waited for the answers, who laughed at my jokes, who didn't make me feel like I was auditioning for permanence. We took it slow. I wasn't in a rush to be chosen anymore. Kevin, one of our mutual friends, asked me one night if I ever regretted how everything ended. No, I said. I regret not seeing it sooner. Some people don't cheat. They just stay for the wrong reasons. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is listen when someone tells you directly or not that they don't want you. I am dvujiste shudme. I have time. I have self-respect. And I have the rest of my life ahead of me, free from being anyone's backup plan. 2 months after everything ended, the apartment finally felt like mine again. Not because it looked different. Most of the furniture was the same, but because the air had changed. There was no tension humming under the surface. No quiet calculation about what mood he'd be in when he got home. No mental editing of myself to make things smoother, easier, less boring. Just space. And in that space, I started to hear myself again. I reorganized the kitchen one Sunday morning. Music playing too loud, coffee forgotten on the counter. I moved things not because they were more efficient, but because I wanted them there. I bought flowers on a whim. not for a special occasion, just because the colors made me happy. I used to think that made me indulgent. Now I understood it made me free. The financial fallout came later in a neat little email from my bank. When I finally added it all up, the wedding deposits totaled just over $8,000. $8,000 for certainty. It stung, sure, but the sting faded quickly when I imagined an alternate. Timeline. One where I stood at the altar across from a man who thought he was settling for me, smiling for photos while privately counting down the years until something better came along. That future would have cost me much more. People kept asking if he ever apologized. Not really. There were explanations, justifications, long messages about intention versus impact, about how therapy is messy, about how he felt attacked and misunderstood. But there was never a moment where he said plainly, "I was wrong to see you as a backup plan." That told me everything I needed to know. Melissa and I stayed in touch, not closely but kindly. She told me he'd stop talking about me eventually, that his new relationship burned hot and fast, like all the exciting things he chased. I wished him peace. I didn't need revenge. I had clarity. In therapy, Dr. Hammond asked me a question that surprised me. When did you first start feeling invisible in that relationship? I thought about it for a long time. Before the therapy session, I said slowly, I just didn't have the language for it yet. She nodded. That session wasn't the end. It was the moment you finally stopped gaslighting yourself. That stuck with me because I realized how much energy I'd spent making myself smaller so the relationship could feel bigger. How often I'd filled in emotional gaps for the both of us. How easily I'd accepted being chosen for convenience instead of desire. I wasn't boring. I was consistent. I wasn't plain. I was steady. And the right person wouldn't confuse those things for a lack of worth. Evan and I went on a few more dates. Dinner, a long walk, coffee that turned into talking until the cafe closed. He never rushed me, never made jokes at my expense, never treated my presence like something he'd tolerate until something better came along. One night, as we sat in his car after dinner, he looked at me and said, "I really like how you see the world." It wasn't grand, but it was sincere. And the first time in a long time, I felt seen without performing. Sometimes late at night, I still thought about that therapy room. The soft lighting, the neutral expression on Dr. Hammond's face, the sound of him laughing as he told me, without meaning to that he didn't want me. I used to replay it wondering if I could have handled it differently, softer, kinder, more patient. Now I understood something important. That moment wasn't a failure. It was a gift. He gave me the truth before I gave him the rest of my life. The gift of truth, however, came with a gift receipt I never expected to cash. It arrived on a Tuesday, 3 months after the last box of his life had been carried out of my apartment. I was at work, deep in a project, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, almost cryptic. "Claire Whitmore? This is Kayla. I think we need to talk. It's about him." My heart didn't so much skip a beat as it did a full, clumsy somersault in my chest. Kayla, the friend, the one on the other end of the phone the night he laughed about me, the one he confessed his apathy to. For a moment, I considered deleting the message. Block the number, burn the bridge, salt the earth. My life was finally quiet. The drama had receded like a polluted tide, leaving behind clean, firm sand. Why invite the tsunami back? But then I thought of Melissa's call, of the cold, hard confirmation that had turned my grief into resolve. This felt like another piece of that puzzle. A missing chapter one didn't know I needed to read. I typed back a single, cautious word. Okay. We met at a neutral, soulless coffee shop the next day. She was already there when I arrived, a latte in front of her, her hands wrapped around the ceramic mug like it was a life raft. She looked tired, not the tired of a late night, but the kind that settles deep in your bones, the kind that comes from carrying someone else's emotional weight for too long. She looked up as I approached, and her eyes held a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like shame. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice softer than I'd imagined. "I wouldn't have bothered you, but I couldn't let it go." I sat down, placing my bag on the empty chair beside me, a small physical barrier. "Let what go?" She took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to the table. "That phone call, the one you heard about." My stomach clenched. "Melissa told you." "She didn't have to," Kayla said, finally looking at me. "I knew she would. I've been feeling sick about it ever since." What he said, how he said it wasn't the first time, Claire. It was just the first time I think he'd truly believe it himself. I leaned forward slightly, the barrier of my bag forgotten. "What do you mean?" She sighed, a sound heavy with regret. "For the last year, maybe more, our conversations have been different. He'd complain about the routine, about how predictable you were. He'd call you his anchor, but not in a good way. More like a boat anchor, something that keeps you from moving, from exploring. He talked about your safety like it was a cage." Each word was a small, sharp prick, but I was surprised to find they didn't bleed like they used to. They were just facts now, data points. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice even. "Because he's doing it again," she said, and her eyes filled with tears. "With a new girl. The exciting one. He's already complaining that she's too much, that he can't relax. He's looking for the next fix, the next thrill, and I realized he's not looking for a partner. He's looking for a feeling that fades, and he's going to keep breaking women trying to find it." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her thumbs scrolling nervously. I saved some of the texts from before. I don't know why. Maybe I knew it was wrong. Maybe I knew I need proof someday. She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, a digital trail of my diminished existence. Asterisk, Claire's great, but watching paint dry is more spontaneous. Asterisk, asterisk, another night of the same 3 shows she rotates through. Kill me. Asterisk, asterisk, she bought a new sweater today. It's gray. Of course it's gray. Asterisk, asterisk, I love her, I think, but sometimes I feel like I'm dating a really nice, really comfortable, really boring piece of furniture. Asterisk, I read them all, one after another. The laughter from the therapy room echoed in my ears, but this time, it wasn't a sound of collapse. It was the sound of a foundation being laid for something new, something stronger. I looked up from the phone and met Kayla's tearful gaze. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," she whispered. "For me, as much as for you. I can't be part of it anymore." We parted ways with a quiet understanding. 2 women connected by a man who saw neither of us clearly. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun, feeling not the weight of his words, but the lightness of my freedom. The puzzle was complete. I had every piece, and the picture it formed was one of a man who was profoundly, tragically lost. A man who would chase excitement forever, never understanding that the deepest, most meaningful adventures aren't found in spontaneity, but in the quiet, consistent act of choosing someone, day after day. That night, I told Evan about the meeting. We were on my couch, the one that used to feel too big for just me, but now felt just right. He listened, his hand resting on my knee, his expression serious and unwavering. When I finished, he didn't rage or offer empty platitudes. He just squeezed my knee and said, "His loss is my gain." And in that simple sentence, I felt a shift. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was about recognition. It was about being seen not as plain or stable or boring, but as Claire. A woman who likes gray sweaters and rotation meals and quiet nights on the couch. Consistent, not predictable. Steady, not dull. And a woman who, thanks to a cruel laugh in a therapist's office, finally learned the difference between being someone's option and being someone's priority. I didn't need to serve justice anymore. Life had served it for me. He was out there, still searching, still complaining, still blaming the furniture for his own inability to build a home. And I was here in my quiet apartment with a man who thought the way I saw the world was exciting. The revenge wasn't in the payoff. The revenge was in the peace. The revenge was in waking up every morning and not having to wonder if I was loved or just tolerated. The revenge was in finally, beautifully, being free. The peace I discovered was not a destination but a practice. It was the quiet hum of my own thoughts, the unedited version of my life playing out without the need for someone else's approval. But peace, like any new skill, requires testing. The final exam arrived in an envelope I never expected to receive. It was a thick, cream-colored affair with an elegant, gold-embossed logo on the back. A wedding invitation. Not mine, of course. Mine was a ghost, a collection of non-refundable deposits, and a single, sterile email to vendors. This one was for my cousin, Sarah, and the RSVP card included a +1. For a moment, a cold, old fear trickled down my spine. The thought of walking into that room, a room full of family who had seen me with him for 4 years, who had congratulated us, who had heard the vague, sad story of our split, felt like stepping back into a battlefield I thought I'd already won. He would be there. Our social circles, once intertwined, still had these frayed threads connecting them, and family events were the strongest of all. I could almost hear the whispers, the pitying glances, the awkward questions. I could feel the phantom weight of his hand on my back, a gesture that used to feel like ownership, but now I knew was just marking territory. Consistent, not predictable. Steady, not dull. And a woman who, thanks to a cruel laugh in a therapist's office, finally learned the difference between being someone's option and being someone's priority. I didn't need to serve justice anymore. Life had served it for me. He was out there, still searching, still complaining, still blaming the furniture for his own inability to build a home. And I was here in my quiet apartment with a man who thought the way I saw the world was exciting. The revenge wasn't in the payoff. The revenge was in the peace. The revenge was in waking up every morning and not having to wonder if I was loved or just tolerated. The revenge was in finally, beautifully, being free. The peace I discovered was not a destination but a practice. It was the quiet hum of my own thoughts, the unedited version of my life playing out without the need for someone else's approval. But peace, like any new skill, requires testing. The final exam arrived in an envelope I never expected to receive. It was a thick, cream-colored affair with an elegant, gold-embossed logo on the back. A wedding invitation. Not mine, of course. Mine was a ghost, a collection of non-refundable deposits, and a single, sterile email to vendors. This one was for my cousin, Sarah, and the RSVP card included a +1. For a moment, a cold, old fear trickled down my spine. The thought of walking into that room, a room full of family who had seen me with him for 4 years, who had congratulated us, who had heard the vague, sad story of our split, felt like stepping back into a battlefield I thought I'd already won. He would be there. Our social circles, once intertwined, still had these frayed threads connecting them, and family events were the strongest of all. I could almost hear the whispers, the pitying glances, the awkward questions. I could feel the phantom weight of his hand on my back, a gesture that used to feel like ownership, but now I knew was just marking territory. fingers lacing through mine, and the tension began to dissolve. We found our table. I was greeted by a wave of aunts and cousins, their hugs genuine, their questions gentle. It was nothing like I'd feared. And then I saw him. He was standing by the bar, a drink in his hand, laughing at something someone said. He was with the new girl, the exciting one. She was wearing a vibrant, floral dress, her hair a cascade of perfect curls. She was exactly the kind of woman he was supposed to be with. And for a fleeting second, the old insecurity pricked at me. But then I really looked at him. He was thinner, his smile a little too tight around the edges. He looked like he was performing, like he was on a stage, playing the part of the happy, carefree man. And his eyes, when they scanned the room, held the same restless, searching look I'd seen 100 times before. He was still looking for the next thing. Our eyes met across the crowded room. For a split second, his smile faltered. He saw me. He saw the green dress. He saw Evan's hand still holding mine. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of something in his expression. Regret? Annoyance? Loss? I didn't know, and I realized with a jolt of absolute clarity that I didn't care. I gave a small, polite nod, a simple acknowledgement of another human being in a room. Then I turned back to Evan, who was telling me a story about his disastrous attempt to bake sourdough bread, and I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream. We danced poorly and joyfully. We ate cake. We talked with my family. At one point, my Aunt Carol, a woman known for her brutal honesty, pulled me aside. "You look happy, Claire," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Really happy." "I am," I said, and it was the easiest truth I'd ever spoken. "He's here," she said, nodding subtly toward the bar. "I saw you two look at each other." "I know. You're not bothered." I thought about it for a second. Aunt Carol. I said, taking her hand. For 4 years, I was a piece of comfortable furniture in his house. Today, I'm a guest at a party. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She squeezed my hand, a knowing smile on her face. "Good for you, honey. Good for you." Later, as the night was winding down, I was at the bar getting a glass of water when he approached. The new girl had drifted off to the restroom, leaving him momentarily alone. "Claire," he said, his voice low, "you look nice." "Thank you," I said, my tone neutral, pleasant. "You do too." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled by the distant thump of the bass from the last song of the night. "I heard about Kayla," he said suddenly. "That she called you." "She did. I can't believe she betrayed me like that." The words were so predictable, so perfectly him, that I almost wanted to laugh. He wasn't angry that he'd been cruel. He was angry that he'd been caught. "She didn't betray you," I said, turning to face him fully. "She told the truth. There's a difference." He opened his mouth, then closed it, the familiar frustration crossing his face. He was a man who hated being cornered by his own words. "This new guy," he said, nodding toward where Evan was talking to my uncle. "He seems nice." "He is," I said simply. "Is he exciting?" The question was meant to be a jab, a way to get under my skin, to imply I'd traded down from the thrill he supposedly offered to the safety I supposedly craved. I looked at Evan, who caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, warm smile that was just for me. Then I looked back at the man in front of me, the man who saw me as a placeholder. "He's kind," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "He's present. He's interested. He thinks I'm funny. He's excited to be with me, Claire. Not just excited to not be alone. So yes, he's the most exciting person I've ever met." The finality in my voice must have reached him. He just stood there, the drink in his hand forgotten, all the Performance and bravado drained away, leaving behind something hollow and lost. He had nothing left to say. I gave him another small, polite nod, the same one from before, and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked back to Evan, took his hand, and we walked out into the cool night air, leaving the party, the past, and him behind us. As we drove home, the city lights blurring past the windows, I realized something. The revenge was never about making him sorry. It was about making myself whole. And standing in that wedding hall, holding the hand of a man who saw me, truly saw me, I felt it. I wasn't just whole. I was complete. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. The weeks after the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt less like a new chapter and more like learning the native language of my own life. The silence in my apartment was no longer unnerving. It was a canvas. The routines I once performed for a relationship became rituals I performed for myself. I woke up early, not because I had to get a head start on the day for two people, but because I cherished the quiet hour with my coffee and my thoughts before the world woke up. I cooked the same rotation of meals, but now I experimented, adding spices I knew he would have turned his nose up at, finding joy in the sizzle of garlic and onions in a pan, a sound that was just for me. The guitar that had gathered dust in the corner was now on a stand in the living room. My fingers, once stiff and unsure, found their calluses again. I learned new chords, fumbled through songs I loved, and didn't once worry about whether it was a phase or if I was good enough to be heard. The music was for me. It was a conversation with myself, and it was long overdue. One evening, Evan came over to find me sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by sheet music, a metronome ticking away insistently. I was trying to master a particularly tricky finger-picking pattern, my brow furrowed in concentration. Didn't interrupt. He just leaned against the doorframe, watching me with a small, gentle smile. When I finally threw my hands up in frustration, letting out a groan, he pushed off the frame and came to sit beside me on the floor. "Sounds like you're winning," he said, nudging my shoulder with his. "It sounds like a cat walking on a piano," I grumbled, but I was smiling. "A very determined cat," he replied. "Can I try?" I handed him the guitar. He didn't know how to play, not really, but he held it with a reverence that made my heart ache in the best possible way. He plucked at the strings cautiously, creating a discordant, but somehow endearing melody. "See," he said, a mock serious look on his face. "I'm a natural." I laughed, a full, unrestrained sound that filled the room. And in that moment, I realized what true partnership felt like. It wasn't about performing or perfecting. It was about sitting on the floor together, making beautiful, messy noise, and not being afraid of sounding a little foolish. It was about him seeing my frustration and not trying to fix it, but just joining me in it. The financial reckoning from the canceled wedding came, as promised, in a neat, sterile summary from my bank. The final number was $8,742, a significant chunk of my savings. For a moment, looking at that figure, the old anger flickered. Anger at the waste, at the audacity of his deception. But then I thought of the alternative. The cost of a wedding dress I'd were in front of a man who saw me as a safe bet. The cost of a honeymoon spent with someone who was mentally calculating the years he'd lost. The cost of a mortgage, a shared life, children, maybe all built on a foundation of his fear of being alone. $8,742 was a bargain. It was the most expensive, most valuable tuition I'd ever paid for a course I never knew I'd enrolled in. Self-Worth 101. I decided to mark the occasion, not with a party or a declaration, but with an act of reclamation. I took the exact amount, $8,742, and I transferred it to a separate savings account I labeled the Freedom Fund. Then, I opened a new browser tab and booked a trip, a solo trip, to a place I'd always dreamed of going but never had because it wasn't his kind of thing. A small, artistic town in the mountains known for its hiking trails and its quiet, creative energy. I booked a 10-day stay in a little cabin with a view of the peaks and a porch swing. When I told Evan, his reaction was everything. "That's amazing," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You're going to have the best time. You have to send me pictures. Lots of pictures. of the mountains and the cabin, and you looking ridiculously happy on that porch swing. There was no hint of insecurity, no questioning why I wanted to go alone. There was only pure, unadulterated joy for my joy. The trip was everything I needed it to be. I hiked until my legs burned, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs in a way that felt like a reset button for my soul. I sat in cozy cafes, reading books for hours, sipping local coffee without a single thought about what time I needed to be home. I bought a ridiculous hand-knit wool hat that was colorful and completely impractical, and I wore it with pride. And every evening, I sat on that porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun set behind the jagged silhouette of the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took my breath away. On the fifth day, sitting there in the quiet, I thought about him. I wondered where he was, what he was doing. I imagined him with the exciting girl, maybe a loud bar or a crowded concert, still chasing that feeling, still searching. And for the first time, I didn't feel a pang of sadness or a flash of anger. I felt a profound and sweeping sense of pity, not in a condescending way, but in a deeply human way. He was on a treadmill, running faster and faster, hoping the next destination would finally feel like home, never realizing that home wasn't a place or a person. It was a feeling you had to build within yourself. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. I scrolled past his name, a ghost in my contacts list, and found Evan. I didn't send a long, philosophical paragraph. I just took a picture of the view from the swing, the sky a masterpiece of fading light, and sent it to him with 3 words, "It's beautiful here." His reply came almost instantly. "Not as beautiful as you, but it's a close second." I smiled, tucking the phone away. The mountains were beautiful, yes, but the real view, the one that truly mattered, was the one I'd gained of myself. I was no longer the woman in the therapy room, listening to her world collapse. I was the woman on the mountain, breathing in her own freedom. And the air up here was incredible. The mountain air stayed with me long after I returned, a kind of emotional oxygen I didn't know I'd been missing. It was as if the altitude had reset my perspective, shrinking my problems and expanding my sense of possibility. The little cabin and the porch swing felt like a dream I'd had, but the feeling they gave me, a solid, unshakable sense of self, was very real. I came back to my apartment, not to a quiet space, but to a welcoming one. The green dress from the wedding was hanging in my closet. The ridiculous wool hat from my trip was on a shelf, and my guitar was leaning against the couch, waiting. My life wasn't just mine. It was a collection of stories I had written for myself. Life, however, has a way of testing your newfound peace with pop quizzes you never studied for. Mine came in the form of a wedding gift. A large, flat package arrived at my door one afternoon. The return address, a familiar, loopy script I hadn't seen in months. It was from his mother, a woman who had always been kind to me, who had hugged me and called me the daughter she never had, who had tearfully approved of my son's choice in a good, stable girl. My hands felt clammy as I carried the package inside. It could be anything. A passive-aggressive olive branch, a final parting shot, a reminder of a family I had lost. With a deep breath, I sliced open the cardboard. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a heavy, silver-framed photo. It was a picture of the two of us, taken on a vacation we'd taken to the coast 2 years ago. We were standing on a pier, the wind whipping my hair across my face, his arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders. We were smiling, and from the outside, we looked happy. We looked like the beginning of a forever. But now, looking at it, I saw the truth. I saw the slight tension in his smile, the way his eyes weren't quite crinkled at the corners. I saw the way I was leaning into him, my body angled toward his, seeking an anchor that was already dragging. It was a photograph of a performance. Taped to the back of the frame was a note, also in his mother's handwriting. It was short. "Claire, I came across this and thought you might want it. I'm so sorry for how things turned out. I always thought you were the best thing that ever happened to him. Linda." I stared at the note, then at the photograph. A wave of something washed over me. Not quite sadness, not quite anger. It was nostalgia, that tricky, seductive liar. It tried to tell me that the time captured in that frame was real, that it was worth mourning. For a moment, I almost let it. I almost let trying so hard, who was still hoping her love would be enough to make someone want to be better. I felt a surge of affection for her resilience, for her hope, for the heart that was about to be broken but would ultimately be rebuilt stronger than before. I took a pair of scissors from my kitchen drawer and carefully, precisely cut my own image out of the photograph. I placed the small, rectangle picture of me smiling into the frame, a solo portrait against the white backing. Then I took the image of him, the man who was settling, and I tore it into small, neat squares. I didn't do it with anger. I did it with the calm finality of an editor cutting a scene that doesn't serve the story. I put the scraps into an envelope, which I addressed to him. I didn't write a note. The message was in the delivery. A few days later, I met Linda for coffee. She had reached out, wanting to see me, and I agreed. It felt important to close this loop, too. She looked older, sadder. "Did you get my gift?" she asked, her hands trembling slightly around her teacup. "I did," I said gently. "Thank you. I miss you, Claire," she said, her eyes welling up. "I miss having you around. I don't understand what happened." I took a breath. It was time to be honest, but kind. "Linda, I care about you too. But your son and I, we wanted different things. He wanted someone to prevent him from being lonely. I wanted someone who was now sitting on my bookshelf. Or maybe he was just the person who had to leave so I could find myself." That night, Evan came over and saw the new picture on the shelf. He picked it up, looking at the small, cut-out image of me on the pier, smiling into the wind. "I like this one," he said. "Me too," I replied. "It's my favorite." He put it down and turned to me, his expression soft. "You know," he said, "for a long time, I think I was also looking for shiny things. For big, dramatic moments. But being with you, it's taught me that the best things aren't shiny. They're solid. They're real. And in that moment, I understood the final piece of the puzzle. My revenge wasn't just in leaving him. It wasn't just in finding my own happiness. The true, ultimate revenge was in becoming the kind of person who could inspire someone else to choose substance over sparkle, to choose real over a rush, to choose a steady, warm light over a fleeting, dazzling fire. I had not only saved myself, I had, in some small way, helped heal a part of him, too, and that felt less like revenge and more like grace. A grace I had earned, one painful, liberating step at a time. Grace I was learning wasn't a passive state. It was an active choice, a muscle you built by choosing forgiveness over bitterness, not for their sake, but for your own. It was the quiet hum that replaced the constant static of anger. But the universe, it seems, has a final, strange sense of humor, a way of bringing the story full circle in a way you could never predict. The call came on a Tuesday, a day indistinguishable from any other, the kind of day that highlights just how beautifully ordinary life had become. The number on my caller ID was one I hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime, but my thumb still knew the sequence by heart. It was his sister, Melissa. My heart gave a single, solid thump. not of fear, but of curiosity. "Melissa," I said, my voice calm. "Claire," she replied, and her tone was strained, tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the warm, conspiratorial tone she'd used when she'd warned me about him. This was something else. "Are you okay?" I asked immediately. A long, shaky breath came through the phone. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "Claire, it's my mom. Linda." My blood ran cold. "What happened?" "She had a stroke," Melissa said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "This morning. She's at St. Jude's. She's stable, but they're not sure yet. The doctor said the next 24 hours are critical." I sank onto my couch, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. Linda, the woman who had called me the daughter she never had. The woman who had sent the photograph. A final, misguided act of connection. "Oh, Melissa, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation so thick I could feel it through the phone. That's why I'm calling," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's here, and he's not handling it well. At all. He's making it about him. He's arguing with the doctors, he's snapping at the nurses, he's pacing the waiting room like a caged wolf. And every time someone tries to talk to him about Mom, he turns it into a monologue about his own stress, his own anxiety." I closed my eyes. I could picture it perfectly. The performance, the inability to see beyond his own emotional landscape, the way he used a crisis as a stage for his own suffering. "He's scaring people, Claire," Melissa continued, her voice breaking. "My dad is trying to hold it together, but he's exhausted. And I thought of you. You were always the calm one. You always knew what to say. You always knew how to make things better." The weight of her request settled on me, heavy and unexpected. She wasn't asking me to come back to him. She was asking me to be the person I used to be, the person who managed his chaos, who soothed his anxieties, who acted as the emotional shock absorber for an entire family. That Claire was a ghost. I had no interest in resurrecting her. "Melissa," I said slowly, choosing my word with care. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. It sounds incredibly hard, but I'm not that person anymore. I can't be." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not asking you to fix him. I'm not. I'm just asking, could you come? For my mom? She loves you. And honestly, I think if you're just there, sitting quietly, it might remind him of what it means to be a family. It might ground him, just for a little while." It was a manipulation, I knew it. A desperate, well-intentioned one, but a manipulation nonetheless. She was asking me to step back into the role I had fought so hard to escape. Every instinct screamed no. Protect your peace. You owe them nothing. But then I thought of Linda, of her kind smile, of her note, of the way she had looked at me with such genuine affection. She was lying in a hospital bed, and her daughter was reaching out to me in a moment of desperation. This wasn't about him. This was about her. And it was about the woman I was now. A woman who could show up for someone she cared about without losing herself in the process. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. The waiting room at St. Jude's was exactly as I'd pictured it. A sterile, liminal space filled with hushed whispers and the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee. The moment I walked in, I saw him, pacing. His hands were in his hair, his movements jerky and agitated. His father was slumped in a plastic chair, staring at the floor, looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. When he saw me, he stopped dead. The look on his face was a storm of shock, relief, and something that looked dangerously like hope. "Claire," he breathed, striding toward me. "You came." I held up a hand, not in a gesture of anger, but of boundary. "I came for Linda," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And for Melissa, and for your father." His face fell, just a fraction. But the agitation in him seemed to quiet, replaced by a sullen stillness. I didn't look at him again. I walked directly to his father, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Whitmore," I said softly, "I'm so sorry." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, and he covered my hand with his own. "Claire," he rasped, "thank you for coming." I sat down next to him, not speaking, just offering the quiet, steady presence I had once reserved for my ex. I talked with Melissa, holding her hand while she updated me on the doctor's vague prognosis. I asked if anyone needed coffee. I found a blanket for a shivering elderly woman in the corner. I did the things that needed doing, the small, human acts of care that had nothing to do with him. And as I did, I felt a shift in the room. The frantic energy he had been radiating began to dissipate, absorbed by the simple, unspoken order I was creating. He watched me. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't engage. I wasn't his audience anymore. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor came out. The news was cautiously optimistic. Linda was stable. She was awake. She could have one visitor at a time for just a few minutes. His father, worn out, looked at me. "Claire, you should go." I hesitated, looking at him. He was standing there, his mouth slightly open, a child who had been denied a treat he felt entitled to. He expected to be the first one in. He was her son, but his father knew. He knew who the calm was. I nodded once and followed the nurse down the hallway. Linda looked small and frail in the hospital bed, and 4 drip in her arm, but her eyes were clear. When she saw me, they welled up with tears. "Oh, Claire," she whispered, her voice raspy. "My beautiful girl." I went to her bedside, taking her hand. It was cool and papery. "I'm here, Linda," I said. "You're going to be okay." "He's a mess out there, isn't he?" she said, a flicker of her old wry humor in her eyes. I couldn't help but smile. "He's worried." "About you. He's worried about himself," she corrected gently. "He always has been. You were always the strong one, Claire, the steady one. I hope he knows what he lost." I squeezed her hand. "Don't worry about that now," I said. "You just need to rest." I stayed with her for my allotted 5 minutes, talking about nothing important, about the mountains, about my ridiculous hat. I was just a friendly visitor, offering a moment of normalcy. When I walked back into the waiting room, the atmosphere was completely different. He was sitting in a chair, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time, I saw something other than performance or self-pity in his eyes. I saw defeat, a quiet, humbling defeat. "Thank you," he said, the words so low I almost didn't hear them. "For being here. For being you." I didn't say you're welcome. I didn't say I told you so. I just looked at the man I had once planned to spend my life with, the man who had called me plain and boring, and I felt a profound, sweeping sense of closure. "I hope your mom gets better soon," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the hospital, leaving the chaos and the history behind me. I hadn't gone back to fix him. I had gone to show up for a woman I cared about. And in doing so, I had proven to myself, once and for all, that my strength was never about managing his life. It was about living my own, with grace, with boundaries, and with a freedom that no hospital waiting room could ever take away. Walking out of that hospital was like stepping from a black and white film into a world of vibrant, living color. The cool night air felt like a baptism, washing away the last lingering traces of his emotional gravity. I hadn't caved. I hadn't reverted. I had walked into the eye of his storm and emerged not just dry, but completely waterproof. The drive home was silent, but it was a peaceful, contemplative silence. I wasn't replaying conversations or second. Guessing my actions. I was just driving, being. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white, and for the first time, they didn't remind me of the lonely, gray-blue light of the parking lot after therapy. It just looked like lights. Beautiful, impersonal, and free. When I got home, the apartment felt different again. It had been a sanctuary, then a stage, and now it was simply a home. My home. I kicked off my shoes, not bothering to line them up neatly by the door. I dropped my keys on the counter with a satisfying clatter. I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up the silver frame. The small, cut-out photo of me on the pier, smiling into the wind, looked back at me. I looked happy, genuinely, unself-consciously happy. And I realized I was finally looking at that picture the way Linda had intended. Not as a memento of a lost relationship, but as a capture of a good moment in a person's life. My life. The next few days were a strange, quiet epilogue. Melissa texted me updates. Linda was recovering steadily. He was still there, but he was quieter, less performative. The crisis, it seemed, had stripped him of his audience and left him with only himself. I hoped he liked the company. A week later, another package arrived. This one was from him. There was no return address, just a plain brown box. My heart didn't clench this time. It just beat steadily, a calm, rhythmic drum. Inside, nestled in a bed of plain brown paper, was my guitar. Not the one I had bought for myself, but my old one. The one from college, the one I had sold years ago to help pay for our first apartment together, a sacrifice I had made willingly at the time, believing it was for us. It was a beat-up, acoustic Yamaha with a nick on the headstock and a worn patch on the body where my arm had rested for thousands of hours. It was the first guitar I had ever truly loved. Taped to it was a small, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. His handwriting was neater than I remembered, almost. Formal. I found this at a pawn shop downtown a few months ago. I recognized the scratch. I don't know why I bought it. I guess I thought. I don't know what I thought. It should be with you. I am sorry, Claire, for everything. I stood there, holding the neck of my old guitar, the worn wood feeling both foreign and familiar under my fingers. This was it. This was the final scene. The last loose end. There was no grand apology, no detailed confession of wrongdoing. Just this. A quiet, tangible acknowledgement of a piece of me he had taken and a clumsy, belated attempt to give it back. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a wave of forgiveness. I felt nothing. And that, I realized, was the ultimate victory. His actions, his apologies, his presence or absence in my life had no power to move the needle of my emotional state anymore. I was the weather. He was just a man, holding an umbrella in a storm that had already passed. I carried the guitar to the living room and placed it on the stand next to my new one. They looked like old friends, reunited after a long journey apart. I didn't play it. Not yet. I just let it be. A symbol of a past that was no longer painful, just over. That evening, Evan came over. He saw the new addition to the living room, and his eyebrows raised in question. An old friend decided to come home, I said, and I told him the story of the and took her own trips. It makes me feel grateful, I said finally. Grateful for the journey. A slow smile spread across Evan's face. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, wrapped his arms around me, and held me. And in that embrace, I felt the final, quiet click of a lock turning in a door that had been left ajar for far too long. The story wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about the therapy session or the revenge or the breakup. It was about this quiet moment in a living room filled with music and light, held by a man who saw the whole, messy, beautiful journey and loved me not in spite of it, but because of it. The revenge was never about making him pay. It was about building a life so full, so authentic, and so completely mine that his opinion, his actions, his very existence became irrelevant. And as I stood there, in the warm circle of Evan's arms, I knew I had finally, truly, won. The seasons turned, as they always do, each one a new layer of paint on the canvas of my new life. The emerald green dress from the wedding was worn to a friend's art gallery opening. The ridiculous wool hat from the mountains became my go-to for chilly morning walks, and the two guitars, old and new, stood side by side like silent sentinels of my journey. I had learned to play a new song on the old Yamaha, a melancholic but hopeful melody that felt like a conversation between the woman I was and the woman I had become. Life with Evan unfolded not like a whirlwind romance, but like a comfortable, beautifully written novel. There were no dramatic highs or desperate lows, just a steady, compelling narrative of two people building something real. We built bookshelves together and argued playfully about which books deserved the prime eye level spot. We tried and failed to make sourdough bread, laughing at the dense, brick-like results. He sat on the couch and listened, truly listened, as I fumbled through my new song on the old guitar, never once offering criticism. Just a quiet, encouraging smile. He loved the predictability I once feared made me boring. He loved that I knew which nights to order Thai food and which nights were for homemade pasta. He called it my superpower. He called it home. One crisp autumn afternoon, we were walking through a park, the leaves crunching under our feet, when he stopped and turned to me. He wasn't holding a ring. He wasn't on one knee. He just took both of my hands in his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. "Claire," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I don't want to get married tomorrow. I don't want to get married next year. I want to spend the rest of my life getting to know you. I want to wake up next to you when we're old and gray and complain about our aching backs. I want to be the person you share your quiet moments with. I don't want a wedding. I want a partnership. Will you be my partner?" The question was so different, so beautifully and fundamentally different from the one I had answered before. It wasn't about a date or a venue or a deposit. It was about a shared existence. It was a choice, not a plan. "Yes," I said, the word feeling as natural and necessary as breathing. "Yes, I will be your partner." He smiled, a wide, radiant, unburdened smile, and pulled me into a kiss that tasted like future and promise and the crisp, clean air of the park. We didn't tell anyone right away. It was our secret, a quiet, powerful truth that existed just between the two of us, a foundation we could build on at our own pace. A few weeks later, I ran into Kevin, our old mutual friend, at the grocery store. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on work and life. Then he hesitated, lowering his voice. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "I ran into him the other day," Kevin said, looking uncomfortable. "He said some things about you, about how you were too rigid and couldn't handle the truth. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't anger. It was..." Just a quiet, encouraging smile. He loved the predictability I once feared made me boring. He loved that I knew which nights to order Thai food and which nights were for homemade pasta. He called it my superpower. He called it home. One crisp autumn afternoon, we were walking through a park, the leaves crunching under our feet, when he stopped and turned to me. He wasn't holding a ring. He wasn't on one knee. He just took both of my hands in his expression more serious than I had ever seen it. "Claire," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I don't want to get married tomorrow. I don't want to get married next year. I want to spend the rest of my life getting to know you. I want to wake up next to you when we're old and gray and complain about our aching backs. I want to be the person you share your quiet moments with. I don't want a wedding. I want a partnership. Will you be my partner?" The question was so different, so beautifully and fundamentally different from the one I had answered before. It wasn't about a date or a venue or a deposit. It was about a shared existence. It was a choice, not a plan. Yes, I said, the word feeling as natural and necessary as breathing. Yes, I will be your partner. He smiled, a wide, radiant, unburdened smile, and pulled me into a kiss that tasted like future and promise and the crisp, clean air of the park. We didn't tell anyone right away. It was our secret, a quiet, powerful truth that existed just between the two of us, a foundation we could build on at our own pace. A few weeks later, I ran into Kevin, our old mutual friend, at the grocery store. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on work and life. Then he hesitated, lowering his voice. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "I ran into him the other day," Kevin said, looking uncomfortable. "He said some things about you, about how you were too rigid and couldn't handle the truth." I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't anger. It was almost anthropological, like observing a specimen from a past era. "Is that what he's saying now?" I asked, my tone genuinely curious. "Yeah, I mean, I didn't believe it for a second, but I just thought you should know." I placed a carton of milk into my basket and looked at Kevin, a man who had been a peripheral character in both acts of my life. "Kevin," I said gently, "the man he's talking about doesn't exist anymore. And the woman he's describing, she was never really me to begin with." He looked at me, confused for a moment, and then a slow understanding dawned on his face. "You're really happy, aren't you?" "I am," I said, and it was the simplest, most profound truth. "I really, really am." As I walked away, pushing my cart down the aisle, I realized that the final, most satisfying revenge of all was this: complete and utter indifference. His narrative, his version of events, his attempts to rewrite history, they had no more impact on me than a radio playing in another room. I was the author of my own story now, and I had long since turned the page. The ultimate payback wasn't a moment of public humiliation or a dramatic confrontation. It was the quiet, unshakable peace of a life well lived. It was knowing with every fiber of my being that I had not escaped a loveless marriage. I had run toward a life filled with a love that was real and chosen and deeply, profoundly mine. And that, I thought, as I picked out a bunch of bright yellow bananas, was a story worth telling. The story, as it turned out, wasn't just mine to tell. It had a life of its own, a quiet ripple effect that spread through the lives around me in ways I never could have predicted. It began with Maya. One evening, over a bottle of wine that was far too expensive for a Tuesday, she confessed. "I'm leaving Mark," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly around her glass. I set my own glass down, giving her my full attention. "Maya," a relationship that, on the surface, looked perfect, but I knew the cracks. I knew the subtle ways she dimmed her own light to accommodate his moods, the way she canceled plans with friends because he just wasn't feeling social. "What happened?" I asked gently. "You happened," she said, and a tear traced a path down her cheek. "Watching you walk away, watching you build this life for yourself. It made me realize I've been roommates. Just like you said, we're great roommates. We split the bills, we keep the place clean, we like the same movies. But there's no spark. There's no choice. He's just here, and I'm just here, and I don't want to be someone's just here anymore." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You didn't just save yourself, Claire. You gave me permission to save myself, too." In that moment, I felt a profound sense of purpose that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with resonance. My quiet act of self-preservation had become a beacon for someone else. It was a powerful, humbling thought. The ripple continued. A few months later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "Thank you." The email was from a woman named Jessica, who I vaguely remembered as a friend of a friend, someone I had met only once at a party years ago. She wrote that she had heard a distorted version of my story through the grapevine, a version that painted me as unstable and unreasonable. But something about it didn't sit right with her. It reminded her of her own relationship, of the way her partner dismissed her feelings as overreactions and her need for connection as neediness. My story, she wrote, gave her the language to name what was happening in her own life. It gave her the courage to start therapy, not as a couple, but for herself. "I'm not at the leaving stage yet," she wrote, "but for the first time, I believe I have a choice. I thought you should know that your courage is echoing in places." "You've never even been." I read the email twice, a strange warmth spreading through my chest. I had never felt more powerful, and it had nothing to do with winning or losing. It had to do with connection, with the simple, profound truth that when one person dares to speak their truth, it gives others the permission to find their own. Even the most unexpected thread was tied up. One sunny Saturday, the doorbell rang. It was Melissa. She was holding a small, potted succulent, a nervous smile on her face. "I hope this isn't weird," she said as I invited her in. "My mom is doing great, by the way. She's back to bossing everyone around." "I'm so glad to hear that," I said, genuinely meaning it. "She's a tough one." "She is," Melissa agreed, her gaze drifting around my apartment. She saw the two guitars, the books, the ridiculous wool hat draped over a chair. "This place feels happy," she said. "It is." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for how I asked you to come to the hospital. It was unfair of me to put you in that position." I shook my head. "You were desperate, and I'm glad I went. It brought a lot of closure for me." "And for him," she said quietly. "He's different now. Quieter. He and the new girl broke up. He's living alone. I think he's finally having to sit with himself. And it's not easy for him. He asked about you the other day. Not in a get-her-back way. He just asked if you were happy. I told him you were." She paused, looking at the succulent in her hands. "He said, 'Good. She deserves that.' And I think for the first time he actually meant it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. "Anyway," she said, holding out the plant. "This is for you. A peace offering. Or a congratulations on your new life offering. Whatever you want it to be." I took the little plant, its fleshy green leaves a symbol of resilience, of thriving in difficult conditions. "Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it." As she left, the final piece of my revenge wasn't about his suffering. It was about his potential for growth. The most satisfying outcome wasn't for him to be miserable, but for him to finally, maybe, begin to understand. That evening, Evan came home to find me on the floor, surrounded by sheet music, the old Yamaha in my lap. I had finally perfected the new song I'd been working on. It was a melody that started out slow and a little sad, but it built, growing in complexity and confidence, until it ended on a series of bright, clear, hopeful chords. I played it for him, the notes filling the quiet space of our home. When I finished, the last chord ringing in the air, he was just smiling at me. "That's our song," he said. And he was right. It was the story of us. The story of me. It wasn't a ballad about a dramatic breakup or a triumphant revenge. It was a simple, honest melody about a woman who got lost, found herself, and built a life that was truly, beautifully, and unapologetically her own. And that was a story that would never, ever end.